business story shortly. In a big story, have the Tories bottled it by throwing Lee Anderson out of the party? I'll be asking Britain's feistiest journalist, Kelvin McKenzie. And is Labour's Angela Rayner guilty of hypocrisy after seeking to reform the right to buy policy, even though she reportedly made thousands from the sale of her own council house? And in my take at 10, it's the only story in town. Lee Anderson may have used clumsy words and crossed a line, but the message is an important one. Britain is now in the grip of dangerous extremism. Killing the messenger won't make the problem go away. So 2 hours of big opinion, big debate and big entertainment. Lots to get through. First, the headlines and a good friend of mine, Tatiana Sanchez.
Mark, thank you very much and good evening. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Labour is demanding assurances that suspended Tory MP Lee Anderson won't have the whip returned. The former deputy chair is still refusing to apologise for saying the London mayor was controlled by Islamists. Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Jonathan Ashworth has written to Rishi Sunak to confirm he won't be allowed back into the party. Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden says he does not believe Mr Anderson is an Islamophobe, and he told Camilla Tominey that while it was right to remove the whip, he couldn't say if it would be returned.
Is he going to be allowed back into the Conservative Party if he shows more contrition?
Well, that's a matter for the Chief Whip, but we set out the reasons why the whip was drawn was that failure to apologise. That's a matter for Lee Anderson.
You can't rule out him returning, having the whip returned. He may have the whip returned, will he, if he apologises?
No, I certainly wouldn't rule that out, but that's a matter for the Chief Whip.
Another debate on Gaza will be held in the Commons after the chaotic vote on Wednesday. The SNP says it will take up Speaker Lindsay Hoyle's offer of a meaningful debate on a new ceasefire motion. There was uproar after he allowed MPs to vote on a Labour amendment, leading to calls for his resignation. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn says his party will seek to move that debate forwards that will push Parliament to support what he describes as concrete sanctions. Migrants have been intercepted trying to cross the Channel for the first time in 1 week. 290 people were found on 6 small boats today and were taken to the Border Force Processing Centre in Dover. The latest arrivals mean that more than 2,000 migrants have crossed the Channel so far this year. A local action group has won its fight over plans to house asylum seekers in Cumbria. Despite a severe housing shortage in the Millom area, 8 properties were earmarked for 40 migrants. Sparked backlash in the community, with police forced to increase patrols after one house was vandalised. In a letter seen by GBNews, the Home Office has now ruled it's not fit for asylum seekers. Dean Myers from Millom Communication Action Group told us it's a huge relief.
The community's just been totally confused. We didn't know who was actually coming into the HMOs. No one consulted us, and it just sparked a bit of anger, I think.
And the Prime Minister has called on the US to continue providing bolder military support for Ukraine following the 2nd anniversary of Russia's invasion. Writing in the Sunday Times, Rishi Sunak said Ukraine's allies should use money obtained through Russian-sanctioned assets to fund Ukraine's defence. Well, that comes as President Volodymyr Zelensky has told a conference of world leaders in Kyiv today that Russian forces will attempt another offensive in Ukraine in late May or in the summer. Well, in response, Zelensky says there's a clear plan for a new Ukrainian offensive, but that he cannot share those details. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Mark.
Thanks, Tatiana. Welcome to a very busy Mark Dolan tonight. I hope you've had a great weekend. In my big opinion, the BBC Director General admits we are woke by saying the organisation is proudly progressive. I'll be dealing with them in no uncertain terms in just a moment. In the big story, have the Tories bottled it by throwing Lee Anderson out of the party? I'll be asking Britain's feistiest journalist Kelvin McKenzie. Plus, is Labour's Angela Rayner guilty of hypocrisy after seeking to reform the right to buy policy, even though she reportedly made thousands from the sale of her own council house? My Mark Meets guest is the inventor of the Tesco Club card. Edwina Dunn, OBE, tells her extraordinary business story shortly. In my Take at 10, it's the only story in town. It's got the nation all split and divided. Lee Anderson may have used clumsy words and crossed a line, but the message is an important one. Britain is now in the grip of dangerous extremism. Killing the messenger won't make the problem go away. I'll be addressing the Lee Anderson situation at 10. And should Lee Anderson defect to Nigel Farage's Reform UK, given that he doesn't have a party? I'll be asking tonight's newsmaker, former government minister and Reform UK supporter, Anne Widdecombe. Plus, tomorrow's front pages at 10:30, with three top pundits who haven't been told what to say and who don't follow the script. Tonight, broadcaster and author Nina Mishkov, journalist and communications advisor Linda Jubilee, and the leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton. Also tonight, Donald Trump has blasted Prince Harry, saying he will be on his own if the former president re-enters the White House, condemning the Duke of Sussex's betrayal of Queen Elizabeth II. How hard could life be for Prince Harry if Donald Trump wins in November? We'll head to America and get the views of Margaret Thatcher's former advisor, Niall Gardner. Plus, the most important part of the show, your emails. They come straight to my laptop, mark@gbnews.com. And this show has a golden rule. We don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. A big 2 hours to come, lots to get through. Lee Anderson at 10, but first, my big opinion. The mask has slipped. Hiding in plain sight, the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, told staff in a private meeting the corporation should be proud to be progressive. The Daily Telegraph newspaper have got their hands on a recording of the BBC boss saying the Beeb walks a joyous tightrope of the culture wars and said being progressive was something that staff should be proud of. Now, this won't surprise viewers and listeners to the BBC, whose output is suffused with woke ideology, whether it's Doctor Who with its finger-wagging, politically correct storylines, a perceived bias in its news output, and the unfiltered views of its highest-paid star, Gary Lineker, who is probably the wokest man in Britain with his luxury beliefs on illegal immigration and climate change, the real-world consequences from which he is nicely insulated. The BBC may be a national organisation, but it is steeped in the North London progressive groupthink, which says that Brexit is terrible, Britain's history is shameful, and patriotism is embarrassing. Remember those breakfast show presenters laughing at a politician who was sat next to our national flag? It's an organisation that tried to scrap Land of Hope and Glory from last night of the proms, and flogged a nice bit of trans ideology with a female nurse preparing for a double mastectomy to become a boy in an episode of Casualty, without properly featuring the potential downsides of such a procedure. EastEnders was used during the pandemic to flog vaccinations, which may have saved many lives, but one of the characters expressing some concerns about the vaccine and daring to decide whether or not he would have the jab suffered a massive pile-on from the other characters in what felt like Orwellian state propaganda. And in the wake of Steve Wright's relegation to weekends before his sad passing, we've seen the BBC's war on older talent that appear to be seen by bosses as male, pale and stale. What about the departure of Ken Bruce, whose great crime was having the most listened to radio show in Europe? He didn't tick any progressive boxes though, did he, Ken Bruce? Which is why I suspect he's gone. The BBC risks the accusation of being institutionally woke, not helped by the words of their leader. And don't take my word for it. A new poll has found that working-class viewers are turning off the BBC because they find it too woke. The policy research business Public First found that a perception of political correctness in BBC news coverage means a significant minority of working-class viewers are going elsewhere. This is bad news for the BBC, which I want to survive and I want to thrive. I love the BBC. I just want it to be politically and culturally neutral and for everyone. With an extraordinary brass neck, a spokesperson from the BBC told The Telegraph that the Director General meant progressive in relation to areas like market-led technological change, and that any other interpretation is wrong. Bloody hell, this is gaslighting in the extreme. Market-led technological change, where do they get that from? Do they really think we're that stupid? Davies' comments were clearly based around the theme of political balance, as per the rest of his remarks. And his answer was a response to an internal question from a colleague about whether the BBC needs to be less woke. To which he says being progressive and diverse is something they should be proud. Well, let me tell you that I am a bit woke myself. Yes, I am. I'm a great believer in diversity. I've got a diverse team. What do I believe in? Diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, of background, of gender, of culture, of sex, you name it, race, bring it on. Diversity with a small d is something that most people would support. What they don't support is needless box ticking in which the BBC seems to specialise. So, Tim Davies says the BBC is proud to be progressive. Would that include the BBC Radio 5 Live presenter Nihal Arthanyika, who declared proudly that working with a team that is predominantly white was bad for his mental health? He said, "It's really affecting me that I walk in and all I see is white people." Crumbs. Did Nihal not face censure or punishment? Did they have a firm word? Was he fired? Of course not. Because it is progressive and, yes, woke to see everything through the narrow prism of race, even if it means that what you're saying is categorically and undeniably, in that case, actually racist. How so? Well, can you imagine if a white presenter said that it affects their mental health working with people of colour? The P45 would be headed their way before they had finished the sentence. And rightly so. Not so much at the progressive BBC. And I'm so glad that the boss, Tim Davie, has now admitted it. What sticks in the craw is that you're paying for this, for a narrow set of politically correct and often radical ideas, which the politics professor Matthew Goodwin suggests is shared by a little more than 10% of the population. Well, that means that in time, the 90% will find somewhere else to watch their TV and listen to their radio. A good place to start would be this show, Mark Dolan Tonight. Why? Well, because it's balanced, it's fair, and most importantly, it doesn't cost you a penny. That's what I call progressive. Your reaction, mark at gbnews.com. I'll get to your thoughts shortly. But first, my top pundits tonight. Broadcaster and author Nina Mishkov, journalist and communications advisor Linda Jubilee, and the leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton. Nina Mishkov, your reaction to this leaked tape from Tim Davie, the Director General, admitting that the BBC is progressive, a.k.a. woke.
I don't think you can equate progressive with woke. I really don't. I think you're extrapolating too far, Mark. Progressive, what's wrong with being progressive? Progressive means that you look forward rather than backward. You accept new ideas, you accept new technology, and you use them and move forward. And diverse just surely means that it reflects society today in this country. Our country is diverse, and our television and what we see and hear on the radio should reflect that. You mentioned EastEnders and the anti-vax pylon. Well, that was I would put to you is just merely reflecting the conversations and scenes that were going on within this country, because the soaps, I mean, I haven't watched EastEnders in years, but the soaps are meant to reflect what is happening in our country. They try and pick things up, and also casualty. So I think we're going over the top with this. I think he's just saying we are looking forward and outwards rather than inwards and backwards.
Well, indeed, Nina, but the word progressive with a small p, absolutely, that means progress. And by the way, I've extolled the virtues of diversity with a small d as well. I've got an amazing team here at GB News, and they are diverse in every sense you can imagine. But us. The issue is with progressivism with a large P, and I think that's what the DG is admitting to. He's admitting that the BBC has signed up to an effectively leftist agenda because that's what progressivism is. And that might be the right agenda or the wrong agenda, but not for our national broadcaster, Nina.
No, I don't see how you can equate progressivism with left. Surely the right, or whoever you think, progress is all, as I say, moving forward, accepting change. It's about change. You can't say that progress is merely something that can be attributed to the left.
OK, well, it's an interesting debate, Linda Jubilee. Do you interpret these words from the Director-General that essentially the Beeb is happy to be woke, happy to be slightly left-wing, happy to be progressive?
Well, let's just go back to that little way out that Tim Davie found of saying that progressive was actually attached to a technological issue. I think that's a little disingenuous. I think that of course, people should be progressive, but there are very, very big problems with the BBC right now. I hear that and I see that from people in my family, from my wider circle of friends and colleagues. There are big issues there. Now, it should be fairly simple. You said in your monologue that what you want is for the BBC to survive. I want that too. I don't just want it to survive, though. I want it to thrive, because it should be the gold standard. It should be what we aim at, what we look at, particularly as journalists. Now, it has a fine news-gathering team and some of the best journalists on the planet. It has a great record in doing dramas that are meaningful across the world, and they actually make the BBC a lot of money. Now, we pay a licence fee and we deserve an unbiased, well-balanced output from the BBC. That's what should be happening here, and everything else is irrelevant and extraneous to the discussion.
Well, indeed. I mean, Neil Hamilton, if you ask an American, they would say that a progressive is somebody that's on the political left. Are we getting caught up in semantics here? What did he mean by the word progressive?
Well, the word progressive is used by the left as a badge of honour. You know, they regard us as hoary old reactionaries, whereas, you know, they're the progressive forces that are looking to the future whilst we're stuck in the past. It's nonsense, of course. But, I mean, the whole of the media establishment is really woke and progressive in that sense. And that's not only true of Britain, it's true of the United States. You know, the Washington Post, the New York Times, or people like that, the NBC, the big television corporations in America are infused with the same mindset as you get here with the Guardians or North London mentality in every nook and cranny. And, you know, frankly, I hardly ever watch the BBC. I might watch a few things on iPlayer now and again, but I never listen to their news, which is usually climate change propaganda and the usual woke stuff in its various manifestations. You know, I think it's the least surprising revelation that you could possibly have unearthed to Tim Davie has been lauding the progressive ethos of the BBC, because that's exactly what it is and has been for a big part of my lifetime. You know, there was a time when it was pretty impartial, but no longer, because the mental assumptions of most of the people who are behind the programming of the BBC, particularly in news and current affairs, are Guardian, North London. So it may be unconscious bias on their part. They probably think they are impartial, but they're not.
It's worth noting that millions of people watch and listen to the BBC every week, every day, every hour. Many would argue they're getting it right. Many would argue that it's good for the BBC to be progressive. It's there to reflect modern Britain. So if you want to defend the Beeb, I'd love to hear from you. Mark at gbnews.com. But Mark Dolan tonight is the home of diverse opinion. So whatever you think, let me know. Lots more to get through. Next up in the big story, have the Tories bottled it by throwing Lee Anderson out of the party? Now, at 10 o'clock, I'll be tackling the issue head on in my Take at 10 with my first on-air views on this subject. But after the break, I'll be asking Britain's feistiest journalist, Kelvin McKenzie. Don't go anywhere.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Are you across this microaggression story?
I'm across microaggressions. I'm also across XL bullies.
You would not last 5 minutes.
Oh, for God's
So
sake,
basic-
civil servants, give me strength.
So civil servants have been taught not to roll their eyes. Something you do very well. We both do it quite a lot, actually.
Because it's seen as an act of microaggression. This, by the way, this costs the taxpayer, this training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop, if the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones? I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
Yeah.
But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be in defence of eye rolling.
So me too, I couldn't care less.
But do you know why? Because I want people to give me their genuine reaction, as long as it's not deeply offensive. But I want to know how people feel. And what they're being told here, civil servants are being taught, and of course this is an area of employment law, because people are taking cases against their bosses who roll their eyes at them. They're saying they're being encouraged to say nothing and nod their heads to promote transparency and inclusion. Don't show what you really think, just nod your head.
But I think that comes with then saying what you really think, and this is the key problem, and what these courses are trying to establish. And I looked into some of them when I was researching this, and it's not saying hide what you're feeling. It's saying, rather than huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, if you've got a disagreement with someone, say I've got a disagreement with someone. Because otherwise, you can't have an effective workplace if people are sort of just passively, aggressively huffing at each other.
Why do these civil servants need to be taught this? Why do people need to be taught this? This is just normal discourse in a normal working day. You don't need a seminar on it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Well, a big reaction to my big opinion. The Director General, Tim Davie, has said that he's proud that the BBC is progressive. Someone interpret that as being proud to be woke. How about this from Meghan Mark? Isn't it progressive to defy biology and believe a male can be a female? Wear what you want, but keep out of my private and safe spaces and sports. Oh, and leave teens alone, says Meghan. Matthew says, good evening, Mark. Have you become or always were a champagne socialist? Your programme is changing and I switch off more and more. Well, listen, Matthew, I don't want that to happen. Mark Dolan tonight is the home of diverse opinion, and yours matters just like everyone else's. So keep those emails coming, mark@gbnews.com. Now it's time for the big story, and let's get more on Lee Anderson, GB News star and Member of Parliament for Ashfield, who lost the Tory party whip this week for his comments about London Mayor Sadiq Khan having effectively gifted the capital city to Islamic extremists. Mr Anderson now sits as an independent in the House of Commons. So is this sanction self-inflicted, or is this ex-Tory MP guilty only of speaking his mind and representing the views of many? Well, let's get the views of the most influential journalist of his generation, the former editor of The Sun newspaper when it sold over 4 million copies a day, Kelvin McKenzie. Hi, Kelvin.
Yeah, hi there, Mark.
First of all, I doubt you'll disagree with the message, but did Lee Anderson get the wording wrong?
I think he probably did get the wording wrong, but the sentiment is one which divides. The Conservative Party are in turmoil tonight. This is an issue. The Islamic issue, the Muslim issue, is an issue which, if it lasts to the duration, we'll say the general elections in November, it will destroy the Conservative Party. There is too much division between the Liberals And those MPs who believe, first of all, that there is a fundamental issue about how to accommodate Islamic views within a liberal society. And the way to look at Islam is to look at it as a political party. So I think Lee Anderson is correct in calling out some aspects of it. But, you know, there are political aspects about the way women are treated, sexuality, the way that the workplace works. There are a whole series of issues which should demand analysis both on the Labour and the Conservative side. Lee Anderson has now taken the cat out of the Tory bag, and they will be the ones that suffer. The people that will be whistling gypsy tunes tonight will be reformed. Not because Lee Anderson may or may not join them, but because this debate about Islam becomes centre stage alongside, well, inflation is going to go down, hopefully interest rates will, unemployment is virtually defeated. There is a big issue out there, and now it's now going to be Islam. And the Conservative Party, you've got Baroness Wazi climbing in tonight, you've got the editor of The Spectator criticising Lee Anderson. Now, the editor of The Spectator is basically the Conservative Party at prayer. You know, it's taken over from the Telegraph. Telegraph is very critical of the Conservative Party, right? So you're seeing real heavyweights climbing into an issue, and it will not go away. And it will be the Conservative Party. I could see the following happen. I could see come November, if this is still a mainstream thing, I could see Reform passing the Conservative Party at the general election. I could see it very close to being 21-21, or because the Conservative Party are they are tearing themselves apart tonight, and it will not go away, this issue. Lee Anderson has done the Conservative Party a disservice, but he's done the voters a service, because a lot of them talk about these issues, but you never hear it discussed within Parliament.
That's extraordinary. You think that Reform UK could potentially match the Tories in terms of the popular vote at the next election? Of course, as we'll agree, first past the post means they won't get a seat, but they could get many thousands of votes. Absolutely.
And the cleverest person in all this is always Nigel Farage, who, by the way, is by miles and miles, from the centre-right onwards, the cleverest guy, right? He'll keep his powder dry. The last 6 weeks, there'll be plenty of this kind of debate going on. And that's where I see Rishi, and who doesn't know what to say for the best. It turns out that guy, Oliver Dowden, tonight, and Oliver Dowden basically says, well, you're quite wrong, Lee, but however, some of the points you make are worthwhile. He can't say what he's thinking. No Conservative politician, no mainstream Conservative politician can be seen to say, well, actually, I don't agree with some of the stuff that Lee Anderson said. It's clearly preposterous that Khan has got his mates in. However, it has to be said, there is a guy running Tower Hamlets Council right now who, after all, got banned for 5 years for vote rigging, right? I've never heard Khan turn on him, right? So could that be connected with their mutual faith? I don't know. Anyway, so I think he overstepped the mark. I don't see the problem going away. If, for instance, members of Islam decide to shut down Tower Bridge and that kind of stuff and become like Just Stop Oil, this will be a catastrophe for all politics, to be honest, because it's all right for Starmer to be climbing in tonight and saying this, that, and the other. But what happens if the country feels that we are threatened by what I think is a political religious group? I think it's a massive issue for our nation.
Well, indeed. Now, Kelvin, let's move on, because the deputy leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, has been accused of hypocrisy after it emerged that she made a significant profit from Margaret Thatcher's right-to-buy policy, which she has since criticised and now wants to reform. Exclusive revelations, Kelvin, set to be published in a new book by Lord Ashcroft, suggest that she made £48,500 after selling her former council house at market rates, having received a generous 25% discount when she originally bought the property in 2007. What does this story tell us about Angela Rayner and the Labour Party?
Well, let's first of all say that the right to buy was the greatest single policy of the people which was discovered during that period of when Thatcherism dominated the 80s. It was fantastic. A good mate of mine's dad, postman, didn't have much, and a clapped out council house in Dolan, which is pretty run down part of Lewisham, right? He eventually ends up retiring down in Poole, has the time of his life, right? Thank you very much to Margaret Thatcher for that. So what it does point out is that she kept completely stum about all this. So she thought that nobody knew that she'd made £48,500. Well, along comes a very clever Lord Ashcroft, writes this book and blows her out of the water when she starts saying that the discount that she got, the 25%, should not be available. It should be thoroughly reduced. Well, you can imagine under socialism what that's reduced to. It's reduced to nothing, or reduced to, because they actually don't want anybody who has a council house to buy the council house, because they say it reduces the stock. I say it gives the opportunity for ordinary people to have lives which they don't have to rely on the council being their landlord, and the painting's never done, and the plumbing never works, and nothing, and the garden's never done. They can just get on with it themselves. So actually, it's a fantastic piece of journalism. I congratulate Lord. He doesn't need my congratulations. He's got he's had a fantastic, successful life. But now in his later life, he's become a bloody good journalist, and it's that kind of stuff where you point out the hypocrisy of people who trouser money at one point, thinking everybody's forgotten about it. Then it's revealed. Now what does she say? She hasn't said a word tonight. And in fact, if you read the Labour Party, what they've said is, why don't you leave her alone? That's basically her attitude.
Well, Kelvin, listen, you're right. Lord Ashcroft is a very compelling journalist, of course, as are you. Let's bring in another journalistic legend, because with me in the studio is Nina Mishkov, Queen of Fleet Street. Nina, do you agree with what Kelvin had to say there about Angela Rayner and double standards over right to buy?
I absolutely do not. When Angela Rayner bought that house, she was a single mother of 26 and had a very ill child after that, and she sold it before she ever became an MP. So this has got nothing to do with it. The implication is that somebody should not be making any kind of profit at all. Angela Rayner, she's Labour, she shouldn't be making a profit. Well, anybody who sells a house makes a profit, and that's what they hope. The situation is that I think that, although it gave people an enormous opportunity, as Kelvin said, but the right to buy your own council house was disastrous, actually, for our housing stock, because nobody actually replaced it. Nobody replaced it. And our social housing is a disaster, as anybody will tell you in this country. So although, Kelvin and I really disagree on that, but why? That's the worst thing that Ashcroft can find out about Angela Rayner, trawling to bring out a book before the general election that's going to somehow tarnish Angela Rayner. If that's the worst he can find, well, good luck to him.
Kelvin, you've just received a handbag from Dame Nina Mishkov. Your response?
Well, the point I was making was, and the point that actually the piece made, was that she benefited quite nicely. I've got nothing against her making the money. I love her making the money. Fantastic. And what she was saying was, instead of a 25% discount, she wants a vastly reduced discount. I don't agree with that. I think we should encourage more people to buy their own council houses. And Nina says it affects the housing stock. Well, actually, the less social housing we have, the better. I think people should stride out in life a bit more.
Kelvin, real treat to have you with us on a Sunday night. We'll catch up soon. My thanks to, of course, Fleet Street legend Kelvin McKenzie, and Nina Mishkov, my brilliant pundit, returns in just a few minutes' time. I'll be addressing the Lee Anderson situation in no uncertain terms at 10 o'clock in my take at 10. One thing I will say is important to separate Islam as a religion and Islamic extremism. Of course, that will further develop as we talk about it later in the show. But next up, Donald Trump has blasted Prince Harry, saying that he will be on his own if the former president re-enters the White House, condemning the Duke of Sussex's betrayal of Queen Elizabeth II. So how hard could life be for Prince Harry if Donald Trump wins in November? Well, we're going to head to the United States and get the views of Margaret Thatcher's former top advisor, Niall Gardner. That's next.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show. Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens with our team of dedicated journalists across the UK. We're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Let's have a look at this. Dear Mark Clive, in response to our conversation about Angela Rayner and the right to buy, Maggie Thatcher told councils for every house sold, they must build one. Guess who stopped that? Yes, Labour. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown stopped it. Clive, I think some would challenge that view, but you're entitled to your opinion. I, like you, was a massive Sunak supporter, but my opinion wavered. Don't change what you're doing for other viewers, says KJ. And listen, more emails to come. So many emails to get through. But first, let's get to this other story. Donald Trump has said that Prince Harry will be on his own if he wins a second term this year, as the former president criticised him for an unforgivable betrayal of Queen Elizabeth II. Mr. Trump said that Joe Biden's administration had been too gracious to the Duke of Sussex since he moved to America in 2020. Speaking at the Conservative Political Action Conference near Washington, D.C. on Saturday, Mr. Trump told The Express, "I would not protect Harry. He betrayed the Queen. That's unforgivable. He would be on his own if it was down to me." Meanwhile, Prince Harry's immigration status has become the subject of legal dispute by the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank which argues that he cannot legally have entered the US because he admitted to taking illegal drugs in his memoir, Spare. Well, let's get reaction to all of this. We head straight to the United States, and a good friend of the programme, Niall Gardner, foreign policy analyst, contributor to the Telegraph newspaper and former aide to Margaret Thatcher. Niall, we'll get to the comments of Donald Trump shortly, but you are a leading figure at the Heritage Foundation. What is your case against Prince Harry and his claim for US residency?
Mark, great to be on the show today. And on Friday, actually, the Heritage Foundation took the Biden administration to federal court in Washington, D.C. to secure the release of Prince Harry's immigration records, especially in light of his revelations of widespread and extensive drug use. So this was actually the second court hearing heard by a federal judge. And at the end of the hearing, the judge indicated that he may seek to see the records himself in the course of the next few days. That's a huge development. And I think the Biden administration's attempts to hide Prince Harry's immigration records ultimately will not succeed. Our view at the Heritage Foundation is that we have a very good chance of winning this case, that the American people will be able to see exactly what Prince Harry put down on his immigration records. And if indeed Prince Harry lied on his application, that would be a serious matter. That would be a criminal offence. And also we want to see whether or not he was given any kind of preferential treatment by US authorities. So it's a big case in the United States. We had an extremely positive hearing on Friday. I think there is a very good chance that the Biden administration will be forced to release Prince Harry's immigration records to the American people.
What is the desired outcome of the Heritage Foundation?
Well, the desired outcome simply is for the records to be released so that the American people can see exactly what Prince Harry put down on his immigration application. And of course, lying on an application, if indeed that was the case, that is a very, very serious matter. It is a criminal offence. And so we're calling for transparency and accountability. No one should be above the law, and that includes royalty like Prince Harry.
You just want the truth, and that's entirely laudable. If you are to prevail, what is the worst-case scenario for Harry?
Well, that's a great question. Ultimately, that will be a matter for US authorities to handle. But if it was revealed that Harry had lied on his application, that would be a criminal offence. Normally, individuals in those circumstances would be subject to removal from the United States. So the stakes are extremely high for Prince Harry right now.
Listen, I wish we had longer. A quick one, if you can, Niall. Donald Trump, as you just heard, has said that Prince Harry will be on his own if he wins a second term in November. How hard do you think President Donald Trump in the White House could make life for the Sussexes?
Well, I think President Trump spoke the truth when he condemned Prince Harry at the CPAC conference earlier last week, actually. And I think that Donald Trump takes a very dim view of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. After all, they have become sort of leading woke left figures who have intervened, frankly, in American politics. And Donald Trump said correctly, of course, that Prince Harry had demonstrated incredible disloyalty to the Queen. And he really blasted Harry for that. And I think Donald Trump's words would be supported by tens of millions of Americans. I mean, Harry and Meghan are deeply unpopular figures in the United States. I think that everything Donald Trump said was accurate about Prince Harry. And I think the vast majority of the American people would agree, actually, with President Trump, with what he said about Prince Harry at the CPAC conference.
Of course, the Sussexes would point to the popularity of their Netflix show, the sales of the book Spare, by way of disagreement with you. But it's fascinating what you've had to say, Niall, and I do hope you'll join us again soon.
I will do. Many thanks, Mark.
Brilliant stuff. My thanks there to Margaret Thatcher's former advisor, contributor to The Telegraph, and something of an international diplomat in his own right, the one and only Niall Gardner. At 10, I'll be tackling the Lee Anderson issue head-on in my take at 10. I'm not pulling my punches. You won't want to miss it. But first, my Mark Meets guest is the inventor of the Tesco Club Card. Edwina Dunn, OBE, tells her extraordinary business story next.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, you know, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.
No one would doubt your sincerity in your views. You genuinely believe in what you fight for. But there are others who think differently. For example, there are Islamist extremists who believe that people will go to hell unless they convert to Islam. They will sincerely, perhaps, break the law in order to force people to convert. In their view, they might be saving people's lives for eternity. There might be abortion activists who say that babies are being murdered and to save their lives, we need to break the law to stop people having abortions. Why do you get to say that your moral conviction is the one that's right and other people's individual moral conviction are those that are wrong?
So what's really integral to the Just Stop Oil campaign is the fact that it is a non-violent campaign. That's what separates us from the examples that you've just given. We're absolutely dedicated non-violence, both as a tactic and as a principle. So though we might be breaking the law...
If individuals take it upon themselves to break the law for whatever their course is, surely the way that we decide what society wants in general is democratic and within the law.
Well, of course, we know also that protest is absolutely integral to maintaining and upholding a democracy, and in particular, non-violent protest. I mean, I really can't express to you how severe this situation is, and I'm sure you know this.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Coming up in my Take at 10, Lee Anderson used clumsy words and crossed a line, but the message is an important one. Britain threats being in the grip of dangerous extremism. Killing the messenger won't make the problem go away. That's my Take at 10 at 10 o'clock, but first, Mark Meets. Yes, and tonight, the brains behind the world's first and largest loyalty card scheme, the Tesco Club Card. Edwina Dunn was awarded an OBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours in 2019 for her service to the world of data and business. She's been described as one of the most creative and influential entrepreneurs of our time. She's also a champion of women in the workplace, having launched the non-profit organisation The Female Lead, which encourages young girls to become the next generation of leaders. Her new book explores that very theme, When She's in the Room, How Empowering Women Empowers the World. Now, the book is out on Thursday, the 29th of February, but you can pre-order it on Amazon and at waterstones.com, or indeed at your local bookshop. Edwina Dunn, OBE, welcome to Mark Dolan tonight.
Thank you, Mark.
How has the workplace changed for women since the beginning of your career?
A lot. When I travelled around the world meeting big multi-billion-dollar retailers, euro, pound, everything, it was all men. The whole boardroom was male, and I was the only woman in the boardroom. And so it was a strange place, and yet an exciting time. So I kind of adapted and I suppose learned to speak in a slightly different way, less words and a bit slower.
Is that right? Did you have to become more male? Did you have to relinquish your female qualities?
I don't know that I could or that I did. I mean, I was a mother with very young children at that stage. So a lot of the time I just felt slightly uncomfortable in that role. But I fell back on the fact that we were the only people doing what we did. So it was a pioneering time. It was an exciting time. And to be really honest, they were all forward-facing because everybody around the world wanted to do what Tesco had done.
Well, you know, they were very lucky that you were a voice in the room, that you were in the room, because you transformed the fortunes of Tesco, which I think is the UK's biggest retailer now, and certainly sort of supermarket retailer. It's massive, isn't it? The message, empowering women powers the world, is a fantastic message. What is it, do you think, that women uniquely bring to an organisation?
Great question. So women have 3 roles. They do most of the unpaid and low-paid work around the world. Number 2, they are colleagues in our workplace, but as we know, they don't always rise to the very top. But number 3, which is the one that's been forgotten, is women are the consumers that decide and buy everything around the world. So their pound, their dollar, their pound, their euro is immensely powerful. They decide 70% of everything that we buy in the household.
So that's definitive, isn't it? The book is out. I've actually got a copy of it. It's out next week, but here it is. It's winning rave reviews already. But will men be afraid of this book? Are they going to be cancelled by this book? Are men bad?
I have a son, OK, so no.
6'5", I've heard.
He is. He's the same height as you.
I'm sure he's a very dashing young man.
Well, I'm biased, of course, as indeed are you.
Oh, God bless you for that.
But no, it isn't going to alienate men, because it's about using the data that we've been collecting about women to show that we can understand them better. By understanding them better, we can do what we did with consumers. So for Tesco, when we doubled their market share in 3 years, it was all about showing that consumers are different. They want and need different things. Well, here we go. Women are different. Those nuances are being missed today. And so those nuances, I think, can make organisations billions of pounds if they do it right. And that data we want to share so that we can put women in that light of being influential, powerful decision makers.
Well, I've been in the media for a couple of decades, and for me, you know, a show or indeed a production team that doesn't have female input, it has got a colossal blind spot within it, because you are losing half of the population and more. And as you said, there are unique qualities that women bring to the workplace. The Tesco Club Card is an amazing achievement. Why has it been such a resounding success? Why do these loyalty cards work? Why not just have cheaper biscuits and cheaper milk?
Because when you respond to consumers and what they want, it is much more complex, because we don't all want the same things. You could argue, and certainly at this point in time, we all want lower prices. But we also want to go to a store where we get the products we want, and we want good service, and we want clean stores, and we want it to be local. So actually, getting all of those things right means that it changes our choices and where we go. So if you get it right a little bit better than your competitor, you win. And you win one extra item in the shopping basket or one extra visit from that customer. And that's what creates the billions of dollars.
Well, indeed, and of course you're membership of a community as well, aren't you? You're a member of a community, the Club Card. It's a club, clues in the name, and we all like to be in a club.
Smart club.
Smart club, well that's it. Other supermarkets are available. I've got all of the loyalty cards, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, you name it, and Tesco. Sainsbury's were a little sniffy about the Club Card when it came out, weren't they? They were a bit late to the party.
They were. I think at that time they went down as calling it just another green shield stamp. And they got it very wrong, and they didn't see it coming. They didn't see how much it could change just by knowing what people wanted. And so from that point on, they went from being the number one to being a rather poor number two.
Briefly, a good number of my viewers and listeners were concerned that Tesco had to recently change the way that Club Card points are valued, and they felt a bit cheated out of that. Did you have a view on that?
Well, I'm a bit out of that.
And you don't represent Tesco
and I
as such.
don't represent Tesco, but I think where they've gone to is very much more the American model. And so, as we know, a lot of things that play out in America come over here.
Whether it will have the same staying power, I don't know. But it's important to keep customers with you.
We could do an hour. Congratulations on your career, which continues. I'm curious to find out what happens next. But let me tell you that right now the book is out. Let's take a look at it in all its glory. It is called When She's in the Room, How Empowering Women Empowers the World. Edwina Dunn, OBE, thank you so much for joining us. Catch you again soon. Next up, folks, I will be dealing with Lee Anderson. I won't pull my punches. See you in 2.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. February is continuing on its reasonably unsettled picture, and it has been a very wet end to the weekend for many southern areas of England. We've got this band of rain continuing to sweep its way eastwards, particularly for southeastern England overnight and into the early hours of tomorrow morning. Some very persistent rainfall could provide some disruption and localised flooding in places, so do continue to take care. Further north, there will be some clear spells overnight, some showers falling on frozen surfaces where we see a patchy frost developing across parts of Scotland, so we might see some icy stretches first thing on Monday morning. Otherwise, there will be some sunny intervals for many of us, but this rain in the far southeast will just take a little bit of time to eventually clear its way off. Quite a brisk northeasterly breeze coming in off the North Sea, and it is going to make it feel quite cold and crisp. Some showers just filtering in on that for northeastern England and eastern Scotland as well. Temperatures will be around where we'd expect them to be for the time of year, but as I said, that cold breeze could certainly make it feel a little bit bitter. Into Tuesday, this ridge of high pressure that has brought us the fine conditions on Monday will slowly slip its way southwards, allowing this cold front to then move its way in from the northwest, so increasingly turning wet and windy for Scotland and Northern Ireland first thing. And we'll watch as that front slowly pushes its way southeastwards during the day. It will tend to fizzle out, turning lighter and patchier, so certainly the far southeast will stay dry throughout a good portion of the day. We continue to see, though, further bands of rain and showers moving their way in throughout the second half of the week, but enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system. And
so there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10 o'clock on television, on radio and online in the United Kingdom and across the world. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. In My Take at 10, Lee Anderson may have used clumsy words and crossed a line, but the message is an important one. Britain risks being in the grip of dangerous extremism. Killing the messenger won't make the problem go away. Should Lee Anderson defect to Nigel Farage's UKIP? Reform UK, I should say. I'll be asking tonight's newsmaker, former government minister and Reform UK stalwart Anne Widdecombe. Plus, tomorrow's newspaper front pages and live reaction in the studio from tonight's top pundits. So, a packed show, lots to get through. I'll be tackling the Lee Anderson issue. My first on-air comments after the headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Mark, thank you very much. These are your top stories from the GB newsroom. Labour's demanding assurances that suspended Tory MP Lee Anderson won't have the whip returned. Today, the former deputy chair still refused to apologise for saying the London mayor was controlled by Islamists. Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Jonathan Ashworth has written to Rishi Sunak to confirm he won't be allowed back into the party. Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden says it was right to remove the whip from Mr Anderson.
I don't believe that Lee Anderson is an Islamophobe, but words matter, and the choice of words that he used, the choice of words that he used was not appropriate. He was given the opportunity to apologise, didn't take that opportunity, and therefore the Chief Whip took the decision to remove the whip from him.
Another debate on Gaza will be held in the Commons after the chaotic vote on Wednesday. The SNP says it will take up the Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle's offer of a meaningful debate on a new ceasefire motion. There was uproar after he allowed MPs to vote on a Labour amendment leading to calls for his resignation. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn says his party will seek to move the debate forward that will push Parliament to support what he describes as concrete actions. Now, some breaking news this hour. The body of a missing teenage boy has been recovered from a lake in Staffordshire. Police were called to Rudyard Lake shortly after 9:30 last night after 3 boys were last seen in the water. 2 of them were able to get out of the lake and were taken to hospital. Specialist search teams attempted to find the 3rd teenager. The 17-year-old was eventually recovered this afternoon. Police are not treating his death as suspicious. In other news, migrants have been intercepted trying to cross the Channel for the first time in 1 week. 290 people were found on 6 small boats today and were taken to the Border Force Processing Centre in Dover. The latest arrivals mean more than 2,000 migrants have crossed the Channel so far this year. And the Prime Minister has called on the United States to continue providing bolder military support for Ukraine. That's following the 2nd anniversary of Russia's invasion. Writing in the Sunday Times, Rishi Sunak said Ukraine's allies should use money obtained through Russian sanctions and assets to fund Ukraine's defence. This comes as President Zelensky has told a conference of world leaders in Kyiv today that Russian forces will attempt another offensive in Ukraine in late May or the summer. Well, in response, Zelensky says there's a clear plan for a new Ukrainian offensive, but that he cannot share the details. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Mark.
Thanks, Tatiana. Welcome to a busy Mark Dolan tonight. Should Lee Anderson defect to Nigel Farage's Reform UK? I'll be asking tonight's newsmaker, former government minister Anne Widdecombe. Plus, tomorrow's newspaper front pages and live reaction in the studio from tonight's top pundits. Broadcaster and author, Fleet Street legend Nina Mishkov, journalist and communications advisor Linda Jubilee, and the leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton. Plus, they'll be nominating their headline heroes and back page zeros of the day. A packed hour, and those papers are coming. But first, my take at 10. Lee Anderson has been on a journey that would make Phileas Fogg look like a homebod. Born in Nottinghamshire in his youth, he was a member of Arthur Scargill's National Union of Mine Workers, and in 1983 he campaigned for the Labour Party under Michael Foot, the most left-wing Labour leader in a generation. Lee Anderson cites Scargill and old-school socialists like Dennis Skinner and Tony Benn as major influences in his early political beliefs. Lee Anderson worked as a coal miner for 10 years, just like his father, after which he served his community at the Citizens Advice Bureau and latterly in hospitals and hostels, supporting the homeless who had left care. A lifelong member of the party, he was elected as a Labour councillor in 2015 in Ashfield. But in 2018, he defected to the Tories in response to Labour's position on Brexit and what he called the takeover of the party by the hard left. Hardly a controversial view, given that the momentum-backed Jeremy Corbyn was their leader. He was elected a Conservative councillor in Mansfield in 2019, and the rest is history. And now, his career with the Conservatives looks to be history too, after a poorly judged set of remarks about the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan. Speaking on this very channel, Lee Anderson, who is a good friend of mine and remains so, said that Islamists had Mayor Khan in their pocket. He said, "I don't actually believe that these Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is that they've got control of Khan, they've got control of London. He's actually given our capital city away to his mates." Now, I think it was deeply wrong to label Khan in this way. Lee Anderson was given the opportunity to apologise, and if he had done, he would have remained a Conservative Member of Parliament. It's unfortunate that he has not apologised. What's not unfortunate is that he has rightly sparked a debate about the very real threat of Islamism or Islamic extremism to our democracy, to the rule of law, and to the British way of life. It's misleading for Sir Keir Starmer to label Lee Anderson's remarks as racist or xenophobic or even Islamophobic. Anderson is calling out extremism, people on the so-called peace marches chanting anti-Semitic slogans, and just this week projecting anti-Jewish hate speech onto Big Ben, as glaring an assault on our values as you can imagine, short of blowing the whole building up. Now, I've had people on the show saying from the river to the sea is not anti-Semitic. Well, the words by definition imply the disappearance of Israel from the map. And many say that the words imply genocide. Sounds pretty anti-Semitic to me. I've done a few gigs at bar mitzvahs and Jewish weddings, and let me assure you, from the river to the sea would not be my opening line. Now, the vast majority of British Muslims are our friends, our neighbours and our relatives. They're watching the show tonight. Fellow Brits, they make a huge contribution to this country and are peace-loving. But to vilify Lee Anderson for voicing concerns about dangerous extremists is to ignore a deeply sinister and growing problem in our country, and one which, as we saw in Parliament this week, strikes at the very heart of our democracy. After all, it was the leader of the opposition himself, Sir Keir Starmer, who pressurised the Commons Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, into accepting a Labour amendment which meant that Labour MPs did not have to vote on an immediate ceasefire. He made it clear to Lindsay Hoyle that if Labour MPs had not supported an immediate ceasefire, they would have faced threats of violence and possibly even murder when they left the chamber. Is that not worthy of comment on the part of Lee Anderson or any other Member of Parliament? Starmer is rightly worried about Islamic extremism. So, is he Islamophobic too? Do Mayor Khan and the Met Police not have a case to answer for the amount of anti-Jewish rhetoric displayed at those pro-Palestinian marches. I think the political commentator and author Douglas Murray put it very well on Twitter this weekend when he said, "It's become a great tradition in UK public life to not confront Islamic extremism. Instead, each time there's an attack or threat, we sacrifice someone who said something about the threat. I see this season that Lee Anderson is the votive offering. Brilliant. That'll solve everything," he said. Here is the lesson of the story. Lee Anderson has now gone, but the problem facing our country remains. Has Lee Anderson been hung out to dry? Let me know your thoughts. I'd especially like to hear from you if you don't agree with what I've just said. Mark at gbnews.com. But first, my top pundits. Broadcaster and author Nina Mishkov, journalist and communications advisor Linda Jubilee, and the leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton. Linda, your reaction to the suspension of the whip on the part of Lee Anderson?
It was inevitable that the whip had to be withdrawn. He certainly overstepped a line. In fact, I've had a conversation with him about that several weeks ago, where he said you did indeed have to be very careful about that line, but on this occasion he seemed to be shooting from the lip. At the end of the day, he should have thought more carefully about what he was saying. And I'm talking about this in the capacity as a communications advisor. He should have got his hand on the edit button to try and work out exactly what he was going to say. Now, I agree with Henry Hill, the deputy editor of Conservative Home, who was on this channel earlier on today, who said that most of what he said was OK, and it supports what you're saying, Mark, but the bit about Mayor Khan could in fact be actionable. It could be slander. Because remember, the only defence to that in law would be the one of fair comment. And you actually have to prove, with hard evidence, the truth that underpins the fair comment. And that, I'm not sure that we've got that. Now, the situation is complicated with Lee Anderson, who I know appeals to many people, and I'm a great admirer of his background and how far he's come. But I think we all have to understand that he cannot... It's been said that the whip has been removed temporarily, perhaps, and that he will have to apologise if indeed he's going to be taken back into the fold. But the problem is, it's not a problem actually, but my observation is that I don't think that Lee Anderson will apologise. It's got nothing to do with being intransigent. He does not believe he has said anything to be sorry about. So he isn't going to apologise. The question is, what does he do next? That is interesting. But the other part of my observation is that I don't believe that London is in the grip of extremism. So I don't agree with you. I don't think that's happening. I'd like to see more evidence than just people protesting at the weekend. I would have to be really convinced to think that our capital city is actually in the grip of extremism.
Well, Linda Jubilee, it's just the words and the concerns of the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, who begged Lindsay Hoyle to accept that Labour amendment, because if Labour MPs did not back and vote for an immediate ceasefire, they would face violence when leaving the House of Commons, potential murder. That sounds pretty extreme to me.
Yeah, but it's also subjective and it's an observation, and we don't know what went on in the room with Sir Lindsay Hoyle. We don't know exactly what the conversation was because there were only two of them in the room. They even ejected the clerk, who's the person who understands the legal process inside the chamber. He wasn't in the room with them.
No, well, indeed so, although I understand that this decision to accept the Labour amendment went against the advice of the House of Commons clerks working under the Speaker. But listen, let me get your thoughts on this, Neil Hamilton, your reaction to this whole story.
Well, I'm rather underwhelmed by it in a way, because all that Lee
pointed out was the reality of what's happening in this country, and in particular in London. Of course, this is all part of the Tories' grand electoral strategy to try to alienate every possible grassroots Tory voter before the election comes. So they'll have a complete clean sweep, and they're doing very well at that at the minute. And I think they were on 21% in the latest opinion poll, which is far, far worse than John Major in 1997. What we've got running the Tory party today is a collection of social democrats and wet centrist liberals who have nothing in common whatsoever with ordinary people whom Lee Anderson represents and speaks for. You know, London has changed. 36% of the people in London identified themselves as white British in the 2021 census, 36% in our capital city. There are now 4 million Muslims in this country, whereas 20 years ago there were only 1.5 million. And by 2050, it's projected that we shall have 13 million Muslims in this country. Now, that's going to make a great difference to the way our political system works, because in the 2019 general election, 72% of Muslims voted Labour. So, of course, they've got a stranglehold on the Labour Party, and sectarian politics has arrived in Britain big time. What we used to associate only with Northern Ireland is now increasingly going to affect, in particular, our big cities, in which the Labour Party is overwhelmingly preponderant. And so they're going to, in effect, have a stranglehold on the Labour Party. This is inevitable with the figures as they are developing. Now, if we ignore this, we ignore it at our peril. And what we see on the streets in London with these pro-Palestine marches is just a symptom of the problem and is a foretaste of what is to come.
However, Neil, your concerns, your projections about a growing number of British Muslims in the population, is that not Islamophobic?
No, I'm just saying 72% of them voted Labour in 2019, and therefore people who are Muslim activists in the Labour Party are going to become more preponderant within it. That means who is driving these pro-Palestinian marches? The average member of the British public is not as exercised about this issue as the activists.
Neil, you're completely wrong. The average member of the British public is not just exercised, but horrified by what is going on in Gaza. And before we just...
Well, I don't know what you're basing that on.
Extend this, the number of children and women that are being slaughtered, the number of people who have died, innocent people, innocent victims.
Well, blame Hamas, not Israel.
Well, you can blame who you like, but the point
it's a terrorist state which attacked Israel and slaughtered 1,500 people on 7th of October. Be that as it may, innocent women and children are dying, and we are seeing it on our televisions every night, and it's horrifying. It's very hard. Why doesn't Hamas surrender and hand over the hostages?
It's very hard to get through a news bulletin on Gaza when you see young children maimed or crying.
But Nina, we can all agree, but does that justify violent, murderous threats on Labour MPs if they don't back a ceasefire, which is the reason why the vote was cancelled?
No, that's not it. Look, I have no truck with religion of any kind, whether it's Catholic, Jewish, Mormon, or Islam. I think religion is the root of all of our problems when it comes down to it. So I am not for any side, and I want to distinguish between the Jewish people, the Israeli state, and Netanyahu, because those are all very, very different things. But I want to say that London is not in the grip of Islamist extremism. This is inflammatory, it's divisive, and it's the sort of rhetoric that we should not hear. And those marches, as far as I can tell, apart there are extremists in any organisation or any group of people, there will be an extremist. But the majority are marching just for peace. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. That's what they're saying.
OK, no problem. But there's no extremism, Islamic extremism in Britain, except in the area around Westminster, according to Sir Keir Starmer. But listen, we're going to debate this at 10:30 because my pundits are back for the papers. It's all over the papers. But next up, should Lee Anderson defect to Nigel Farage's Reform UK? I'll be asking tonight's newsmaker, former government minister and Reform UK stalwart Anne Widdecombe. Who's next?
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Claire, you want to talk by cars growing by a couple of centimetres a year?
Yeah, well, 1 centimetre every 2 years.
Okay.
It's unrelenting because the people are so fixated on the big SUVs. The sales have gone through the roof, and yet it's James Nix, the analyst for Transport and Environment campaign, said the author of the report on the trend said, spurred on by sales of the largest SUVs, vehicles are getting wider every year. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, it means that our roads weren't...
Comfortable ride, beautiful engines. I mean, it's luxury, it's gorgeous.
Well, as I know, I used to have two, but I don't...
You used to have 2 SUVs?
Well, one SUV at a time, but I had 2 brands of them. But I'd no longer drive in London now because I just don't see the point, because of the ULEZ, because of the, you know, you can run down a thing and get fined.
Parking spaces, whatever.
Yeah, the growth in car size also causes issues for their drivers. The report found that largely luxury SUVs, which are about 2 metres wide, no longer fit in off-street parking.
That's true.
They also leave too little space for passengers to get in and out of the vehicles in typical off-street spaces, and they're about 2.4 metres wide, the report found. And I'll tell you, I was stuck in a bus last night trying to get home, and the buses couldn't move because the streets were too crammed with all of these massive cars either side.
Chelsea tractors.
And it was gridlocked.
Yeah, but maybe they're not the problem, maybe the buses are the problem.
The buses take people to their place of work and get
I'd
them
like
home.
to know when, because when I go through London, all I see is empty buses.
Oh, you're lucky. Every time I'm on one, they're full.
Well, they're obviously only full at rush hour. You see, the thing is, property developers, when they do high-rise car parks or, you know, they build a multiplex cinema and there's a car park attached to it, that's not my fault that I can't fit into their space. It's their fault. So
well, it's all driven by money, isn't it? The more spaces that they have,
exactly.
the more people they can get.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, a big reaction to my take at 10. Of course, Lee Anderson is now an independent in the House of Commons after his comments about the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Dear Mark, Lee Anderson speaks for hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions, with his comments about a Muslim extremist takeover of the UK, says Barry. Glennis says, could you please tell Nina Mishkov that women and children were killed and destroyed when Hamas went in to kill and do atrocities on their planned raid on the 7th of October. The Tories, says Annie in Norwich, are totally wrong to suspend Lee Anderson. He's the only MP who understands ordinary people. OK, fascinating stuff. Well, look, let's do more on this now. And Lee Anderson's comments about the London Mayor Sadiq Khan have been poorly received in some quarters. His subsequent suspension from the Tory party has happened. So let's get reaction from tonight's newsmaker, former government minister, television personality and Reform UK supporter Anne Widdecombe. Anne, great to see you again. First of all, did Lee Anderson go too far in his remarks about the London mayor?
Well, superficially it looks that way, but what I always say when these sorts of rows blow up, which is every 5 minutes in Westminster, but when these sort of rows blow up, I always say there is a stage before demanding an apology. And that stage is to say, would you please justify what you've said? Now, as far as I can make out, nobody's actually asked him to do that. And if you can't justify what you say, then, of course, you should be required to apologise. But if you can explain and justify what you say, then that is a different matter altogether. And that stage seems to me to have been missing in the way that the Conservative Party has reacted. Now, this is a man who does speak for the ordinary person who is very popular in what you might call the red wall. And I think there should have been that intermediate stage where you say, hang on, you've just said this. Now explain why you've said it. Justify it. That's what I would have said before moving on to the apology, the suspension, the great grandstanding. For heaven's sake, calm down, everybody.
And do you think there's any chance that the Conservative whip will be reinstated?
I don't know. I mean, I've given up, quite honestly, trying to understand the mentality of the people who are running the Conservative Party, if you like, the high command. I simply don't understand it anymore. And therefore, I cannot predict what they will do. All I can say is that it would not surprise me if they rode back and decided to reinstate it. Equally, it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't. I don't know what they'll do. They no longer act along predictable line. I mean, John Major's line, you mentioned John tonight, for example. John Major's line was always innocent until proved guilty. If guilty, then we act. Now, that seems to me straightforward.
Anne Widdecombe, were the Conservatives wrong to suspend the whip? Has Rishi Sunak bottled it?
I really, honestly, I can't answer that because, as I say, that intermediate stage is missing, where you say, justify it, explain it, you know, did you get something, did you misphrase something, or did you really mean this? And if so, what's your evidence, for heaven's sake? That phrase is missing.
And sorry to interrupt you. Lee Anderson made a statement and he said, look, I make no apologies for pointing out the law and disorder in London and every weekend anti-Semitic slogans being chanted among extremists with impunity. So that's the context in which he placed his remarks.
Yes, but he talked about taking over the mayor of London. That then personalises the issue. That's slightly different. I'm totally with him when he talks about, you know, what we're seeing on the marches. And there is undeniably discriminatory policing. You know, you police very hard when it's anti-Palestinian, but you let I almost said pro-Hamas, but you let those who are against the war in Gaza actually beam stuff onto Big Ben, which is unlawful. And the police just stood there and let it happen. And yet these are the same police who will come down like a ton of bricks if some middle-aged, harmless Christian woman is praying in her head, saying nothing out loud, within so many yards of an abortion clinic. You know, the same police. Now, is that even-handed policing?
Most definitely, or if you had the temerity a couple of years ago to protest against those ruinous and scientifically debatable lockdowns, Anne. Now, you mentioned that Lee Anderson is a very popular figure nationally, as are you, of course. Do you think that Lee Anderson should defect to Reform UK?
Well, that's got to be a matter for Lee Anderson, and let me say right away, Mark, I'm not in charge of vetting membership applications.
Would you like Lee Anderson to join Reform UK? What would your reaction be if he were to defect, Anne? What would your reaction be? Would you welcome him?
I would certainly welcome the likes of Lee Anderson, because I think that you know, he speaks for ordinary people in a way that an awful lot of politicians do not. He is not out of touch with feeling on the ground. He's very much in touch with it. But as I say, I am not responsible for vetting membership applications, and it's up to Lee. I make no presumption that Lee wants to join Reform. I don't know what he wants to do.
And we'll catch up in a week's time. My thanks to former Government Minister Anne Widdecombe. Fascinating thoughts. Your reaction to what Anne had to say, mark at gbnews.com. Next up, the papers with full pundit reactions. See you in 2.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Ken, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely on the large whole, even I wave the St. George's flag on a sporting occasion. And I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St. George's flag so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it. It will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. It's time now for tomorrow's front pages. We start with the Express. Dame Esther backed by the Chancellor over vote on assisted dying. Red's delight after last gasp winner for Klopp's men. And damning claims of 250,000 extra migrants a year under Labour. Sir Keir Starmer's open-door policy on migrants could lead to an extra 250,000 arriving in Britain every year, according to a new report. Newspaper, Tory party in the gutter over racism, warns Baroness Wazi. She's a former chair of the party. She says Muslims are treated as electoral campaign fodder, with racism tolerated. Metro. TV's Kate caught in spike epidemic. TV reporter Kate McCann has told of the horrifying night her drink was spiked at a club, leaving her feeling out of her body and slumped on the floor. The Daily Telegraph now. Red Wall revolt over Lee Anderson sacking. Rishi Sunak is facing warnings from Red Wall Tory MPs of a voter backlash over his sacking of Lee Anderson, according to leaked WhatsApp messages that can be disclosed by the Telegraph. Some Tory MPs privately told colleagues their inboxes were flooded with supportive messages about Mr Anderson after he was stripped of the whip. Workers in their 20s more likely to be signed off sick, and plan for foreign criminals to be deported rather than jailed. The Times now cleverly warns of AI fakes and a threat to the election, and poor mental health keeps young adults out of work. The Guardian, Sunak urged to speak out as Islamophobia row deepens within the Conservative Party, and fears that Hunt's tax cuts will trigger a new era of austerity. Britain's stretched public services will buckle under the weight of spending cuts planned for after the election, economists have warned, as Jeremy Hunt prepares for another round of tax reductions in next week's budget. Generation Sick Note. Young people are increasingly blaming mental health problems for being jobless, say the Mail. The number of 18 to 24-year-olds who are economically inactive due to health issues has more than doubled in the past decade, rising from 93,000 to 190,000. Sun newspaper. Arsenal aces protection. Prem stars XL bully guard dog. And last but not least, the Daily Star, leap day downpours to make it rainiest February in 258 years. Wet is the headline. Torrential rain on leap day this week will confirm February as the wettest since records began in 1766. Muddy marvellous, say the Daily Star. Fascinating stuff. Let's get reaction now from my top pundits tonight. I'm delighted to welcome the one and only Nina Mishkov. We have Linda Jubilee and Neil Hamilton. That's right, last but not least. Worth the wait, I think you'll agree. I thought the director had gone to the pub there. Listen, let's get to a good number of our stories. Can I just ask you, are there 29 days in February this year?
Yes, there are. Yes.
All right.
You can propose.
It's the 29th.
The 29th.
Anyway, you're already married, so
you're out.
Christine's not going to give you a shock.
Yeah. She does that every day.
Well, I know that. She might fall to her knees, but for a different reason.
I'm not married.
You are. Are you courting at the moment?
No.
All right.
So I'm at a disadvantage.
Am I right in thinking that the gentleman, no, the lady can propose?
That's right.
On the
That's
29th?
the point of it. Yeah.
And if you refuse, you have to give you a pair of gloves or something. There was some really arcane.
I knew you'd know about that, Nina.
What's the story with you and Grant?
We're very happily unmarried and coming up to our 34th year in June.
All right. Thursday is the 29th.
Yes.
So should Grant get ready for some special conversation?
So. No, neither of us are. No, not really. It's his birthday tomorrow, by the way.
First of all, Grant, don't panic because that could be a double bluff. And secondly, happy birthday tomorrow. He looks about 25, that man. It's totally unfair. Happy birthday, Grant, who I think is in the green room watching the show. Now, listen, let's get to some rather juicy political stories. Look, this appears to be very damaging for the Tory party, Nina Mishkov. Tory party in the gutter over racism, warns their former chair, Baroness Wazi.
Yes, I mean, and Baroness Davidson, the former Ruth Davidson, leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, calls it absolute bollocks. And, you know, there is no, there are extremists, as I said before, but to say there's extremism in London and we've been taken over somehow is nonsense. It's absolute
But if members of Parliament are afraid to vote a certain way, have the extremists not won?
No, they haven't won. They haven't won.
Is there a better example of them having not won than influencing our democracy?
Well, the decision that was taken the other day was the wrong decision, and you can't, you know. Lindsay Hoyle made a decision for whatever reason, but it was the wrong decision.
I mean, are they scared to vote? How do we know that? And even if they are nervous about voting, and I appreciate it's horrific that the houses are actually, the protesters are outside houses. I do think that's very wrong.
And constituency offices.
You can't, I mean, you're in politics for goodness sake.
Well,
you know, Alexei Navalny didn't get where he was by being scared.
No, exactly.
Well, where he's got sadly
I
now
was a minister in Northern Ireland and I was on an IRA death list.
Yeah.
You know, the reality today is that on the mainland of Great Britain, there are threats of violence which you have to take seriously. 2 members of Parliament have been murdered.
Yes, but not
in recent times.
not by
Lone wolf attacks.
She was Jo Cox was
not the point.
She was murdered by a right-wing fanatic.
Yes.
So that's completely.
And David Amos was murdered by an Islamist.
Exactly.
So there you go. So,
but on the streets, we've seen in recent weeks the placards which are basically calling for the annihilation of Israel. Can't be any other meaning attached to from the river to the sea. That's exactly what it means. Hamas is explicitly committed to the destruction of Israel. The 10 million people who live in Israel have to go and find somewhere else to live. But that's not
Palestinian
the point.
people. No,
this is Britain. We're talking about Britain and what's happening on our streets.
I'll come to you, Nina. You finish your point, Neil. I'll come to Nina.
We're talking about what's happening on our streets in our country and what's happening to our political system. There was an ICM poll that was done for Channel 4 recently for a programme that they entitled What British Muslims Really Think, and 12% of those who were polled thought that terrorist acts could be extenuated or forgiven if there was a political motive behind them. Now, this, you can ignore this, you can poo-poo it, it's growing, and we know what's happening through migration, which is uncontrolled. We have no idea who these people coming
Nina,
across
are the people,
in small boats
are the people behind the death threats and projecting hate speech onto Big Ben, the inflammatory ones?
Well, it's debatable whether what was put on Big Ben is hate speech because.
Do you think from the river to the sea is anti-Semitic?
I'm not sure that it is. I think it can be. But I think the original...
Is that not enough for it to be a problem?
No, the original meaning was not that. And the thing is...
I think Nina's right. The original meaning was not that, but it has come to mean that.
Is there a single Jew in the country that would be comfortable with the term from the river to the sea?
No, obviously not.
Well, then why don't you condemn it wholeheartedly being projected onto Big Ben?
Well, I think it's definitely wrong to do that.
It's wrong to do that. Of course it's wrong to do that. But to say that we are in the grip of some kind of terrorist explosion, I mean, it's like saying
how many Manchester Arena explosions do we have to have before you accept the reality?
That's many years ago now, and I take you back to when the IRA were terrorists, where we did live through that, and it was, and we are not at that stage.
We don't want to replicate it in this context.
The more you say these things, the more inflammatory it becomes, the more people become terrified, the more they look at Muslims
Nina,
askance.
when you say that, are we not simply talking about a problem which exists, which is extremism?
No. Because
I feel like you're an extremism denier.
No, I am not an extremism denier. But how is it manifested on our streets
every weekend since October the 7th?
They're just demonstrations, and we were allowed to have demonstrations. We must have the right to demonstrate.
You've got to look at it in perspective. They are demonstrations. These are happening every week, and many people, you know, I've got many family members, close friends, associates, they don't like these demonstrations, but the number of extremists in them is relatively small.
Yeah, but you don't need many.
And I would also like to come back to the viewer who came to you. Of course, I abhor what happened on October the 7th. That goes without saying. I'm not saying that, but two wrongs don't make a right.
Is it wrong to defend yourself?
You can defend yourself, but...
Well, that's what Israel's doing.
But then I think 30,000...
Yeah, but you can't have a disproportionate response.
Well,
that's the key.
30,000 people is
it's obvious it's disproportionate.
What would solve the problem is if Hamas were to disarm and to hand over the hostages.
You know, that's not going to happen. May I just say that 30,000 people isn't just careless collateral damage, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, do you not think that Hamas need to be completely destroyed, given the fact that they have made a stated aim of repeating October the 7th again and again and again, and that's a direct quote.
You cannot
destroy an ideology.
You can't destroy an ideology because
you can disarm an ideology, though.
You
18 of the 24 battalions in Gaza have now been taken out by Israel. 6 left, and they're in Rafah.
All of the relatives, surviving relatives of the 30,000 people who have been killed, if they were to join Hamas, would that be a big surprise?
Well, why don't they get rid of Hamas and do something positive?
I think I've got to say, I think you're both right. I'm very torn on this issue, and it's so complex, isn't it? Should we get to a more local issue, Nina Mishkov?
Yes.
And this is about young people suffering mental health issues who Daily Mail are labelling Generation Sick Notes. The number of 18 to 24-year-olds who are economically inactive due to health issues has more than doubled in the past decade, rising from 93,000 to 190,000. I mean, this is not good, is it?
No.
Well, no, it's not good. And I don't want to fall into the trap of saying, well, the younger generation, they're all snowflakes and idiots.
Fall into the trap.
No. No. But the thing is, I think they have been brought up in a different way, and they've been brought up...
Yeah, the issue is that we medicalise things that happen in normal life.
And life being tough.
Yeah.
And life being tough. And you have to accept that life has challenges, and you have to learn how to overcome them. You can't just medicalise every single bad incident that happens.
I think they haven't been given chances to be resilient.
Nina, I look at you. You've had a very successful career in journalism and broadcasting. I doubt you've had a day off work in your whole career. Barely.
I've never pulled a sickie in my life.
Go. So what's gone wrong with this generation? You've had mental health issues, you've had a hard life, you've worked hard, life's not easy. What's the difference between your generation and the next?
Because I was given because of all the things that went wrong in my life, I was given a chance. I had to sink or swim. But I don't think this generation has it.
Should they learn that, Nina? Should they learn that?
They should learn that. And the thing is, I think also when you, as Linda says, when you medicalise things, people talk about, my mental health, my mental health.
There's too much.
And there are genuinely many people who are suffering dreadful mental health.
Too much introspection, too much navel-gazing, too much rowing in the culture wars. There's not enough focus on actually achievements. study hard, work hard. Merit. Pass your exams. Or don't pass your exams, go for a practical
It's
job.
too easy to get a sick note for something which has no physical manifestation which you can see.
Yes.
And,
do you think that the important issue of mental health, and if someone's struggling out there, they must, especially people watching or listening, they should reach out for help. Male suicide is through the roof. But do you think others are weaponising mental health in order to not have to go to work, Neil?
Yeah, I'm sure that there are lots of people doing that, and there's 6.5 million people on benefits in this country, and they're not all people who can't physically work or suffer from real mental problems which make them impossible to employ. But if you're self-employed, you can't get a sick note because if you don't work, you don't earn. I've been self-employed for years, and I hardly ever have a day off.
You've just got to look at this with the question that it's got to have perspective and balance. I do have a child that had quite serious mental health issues in his teenage years. Now he's got a fantastic job, and he's got, in fact, 2 master's degrees, and he ended up fine, and he's getting married, and he's really happy. But he needed a degree of help through years when he was a teenager. Now, you can't ignore that kind of mental challenge. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that you can't give a pill every time someone has a wobbly moment.
Briefly, Neil, my concern, Neil, is that we've got this many young people not going to work. At a certain point, the economy is going to fall over, isn't it?
Yeah, well, they're going to be supported by the rest of us who are still working. I'm 75 years old and I'm still working, and I've got an expensive wife to maintain.
Well, I know that. She's bling Christine. Listen, I'll get to all of your opinions very shortly. Listen, Josh, you haven't got that Express front page on you, have you? Because we're going to do that after the break. Take a look at this story. Damning claims, say the Daily Express tomorrow, of 250,000 extra migrants a year under Labour. Are the floodgates about to open? We'll debate that next. OK, so there you go. Look, there you go. That's back to me, Josh. That's fine, because let me tell you, we've also got my Pundit headline heroes and back page zeros. But are we going to have an influx of migration under a Labour government? We will discuss that in 2 minutes. Don't go anywhere.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Are you across this microaggression story?
I'm across microaggressions. I'm also across XL bullies.
You would not last 5 minutes.
Oh, for God's
So
sake, civil servants, give me strength.
So civil servants have been taught not to roll their eyes. Something you do very well. We both do it quite a lot, actually.
Because it's seen as an act of microaggression. This, by the way, this costs the taxpayer, this training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop, if the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones? I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
Yeah.
But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be in defence of eye rolling.
So me too, I couldn't care less.
But do you know why? Because I want people to give me their genuine reaction, as long as it's not deeply offensive. But I want to know how people feel. And what they're being told here, civil servants are being taught, and of course this is an area of employment law, because people are taking cases against their bosses who roll their eyes at them. They're saying they're being encouraged to say nothing and nod their heads to promote transparency and inclusion. Don't show what you really think, just nod your head.
But I think that comes with then saying what you really think, and this is the key problem, and what these courses are trying to establish. And I looked into some of them when I was researching this, and it's not saying hide what you're feeling. It's saying, rather than huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, if you've got a disagreement with someone, say I've got a disagreement with someone. Because otherwise, you can't have an effective workplace if people are sort of just passively, aggressively huffing at each
Why
other.
do these civil servants need to be taught this? Why do people need to be taught this? This is just normal discourse in a normal working day. You don't need a seminar on it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
OK, now listen, let's have a look at the Daily Express. It's a shocking story. Damning claims of 250,000 extra migrants a year under Labour. Sir Keir Starmer's open-door policy on migrants could lead to an extra 250,000 arriving in Britain every year, according to a new report. Not only are you a consultant, a political communications consultant, Linda, you're a former newspaper person as well. Do you buy this story? Do you think there's anything in this? Does it stand up, this threat of an extra 250,000 migrants a year under Labour?
Well, what I want to know is how they've come to that 250,000 figure. I'd like to know what underpins it first.
Yeah.
But it's not inconceivable that this could happen. And if it did happen, it would be disastrous, because we can't carry on this way, funding even controlled immigration of this level. I mean, I'm not talking about the boats, I'm talking about controlled immigration also is a problem in this country.
Well, let me offer you the intel that you were asking for. The Express writes that cozying up to Brussels by joining an EU-wide returns agreement would increase net immigration by almost 130,000 a year alone. Scrapping the government's Rwanda scheme may ramp the figure up by a further 10,000 a year.
That's nonsense.
That's nonsense.
That's nonsense.
The Henry Jackson Society report also points out that Labour may reverse the rule blocking care workers from bringing their dependents to the UK, increasing immigration by a further 120,000. I mean, will there be more immigration under a Labour government, Linda?
Well, if you scrap... Let me just take that Rwanda policy first. If you scrap that, you're going to be adding to the figures by £10,000. That's just not true.
Okay.
They just can't shift enough people with that policy.
This is assuming that Rishi Sunak is going to get 10,000 people into
on a plane,
on planes to go to Rwanda,
all right,
where there's only housing for about 500.
All right, so you're dismissing the Rwanda aspect, but what about the returns agreement with the EU? Will there be more migration under Labour?
Why would that bring more in? Surely, if we get a returns agreement, we can return them. It's not people being...
What do you think? Will there be more migration under Labour?
Yeah, but
Neil?
I don't think there'll be that many more compared with what happens under the Tories anyway. You know, the doors have been blown off long ago.
Yeah. So you're saying there's not much of a difference in the figures, whether it's Labour or Conservative?
Well, we added 700,000 to our
That's right.
last year.
750. Yeah.
So we've added 6.5 million people since the
typical
millennium.
Daily Express hysterical head.
What we would have called a beat-up.
Yes, exactly.
There you go. Well, listen, Nina's not having it. Listen, let's get to your headline heroes and back page zeros of the day. And Nina, who's your hero today?
Christopher Nolan, because in the SAG Awards last night, Oppenheimer, his film, won even more awards, and it looks like he's going on his way to an Oscar, which would be fantastic, which is a wonderful showcase for the British film industry. You know, good on him.
Yeah, look forward to watching that film soon. How about you, Linda, your headline hero?
I'm not a cricket fan, but I was struck by an obit in the Financial Times talking about the great Mike Proctor, who was a player for South Africa, who was said to be one of the greatest cricket all-rounders in 20th century cricket, who never had a test career, never had a test series career because of the sporting sanctions in South Africa. From the beginning to the end, it never happened. And when asked about it, did you ever, feel regret for that not happening? He said, it's nothing compared to the suffering of 40 million people. And he went on from his home in Durban to coach young black kids in cricket. And I think that shows such integrity and such humanity that he is my hero.
What a hero. Briefly, Neil, you've gone for Lee Anderson.
Yeah, man of the people, Lee Anderson, who's welcome to defect to UKIP anytime. We welcome him with open arms.
Most definitely. Well, look, let's get to your back page zero. Briefly, if you can, Nina, who's your loser of the day?
the entire House of Commons for playing politics in what is really a dreadful situation where people are dying in Gaza and they were running around, whosever fault it was, whoever you want to blame, but the entire House of Commons just disgraced themselves.
And Linda, you're not happy with Parliament either, namely the leader of the SNP in Westminster.
Yeah, I think Stephen Flynn looked to me to be disingenuous and manipulative and a little Machiavellian. But I think what I really didn't like was this ranting that went on. You know, I've seen kids in primary schools have more self-control and more gravitas, frankly.
OK, well, of course, many would argue that Stephen Flynn was doing his job and doing it very well. Some people think he might be the next SNP leader, having impressed a few people.
Maybe, but I don't think you should lose control that way if you're in any position of authority.
Neil, why is Angela Rayner in hot water with you, Labour Deputy Leader?
Well, the obvious hypocrisy of wanting to take away the right of people to buy their own council houses or flats, whilst having herself pocketed the profit, which she's sitting on.
Does she not want to just look at the detail of the policy and make it more fair?
No, I think certainly in Wales, I know that the Labour Party have actually removed the right to buy, and I guess that's the policy of the Labour Party as well. If it isn't at the moment, I'm sure it will be.
OK, well, look, thank you so much to my fabulous top pundits, Linda Jubilee, Nina Mishkov and Neil Hamilton. Really enjoyed your company and really enjoyed your company on the radio and on TV. This show is nothing without you. Thanks for the emails. Thank you for watching and for listening. I am back on Friday at 8 o'clock and, of course, Saturday and Sunday, 9 till 11 for all your favourite aspects of the show. The Big Opinion, The Take at 10, Mark Meets and my top pundits. So lots to get through. Don't forget, next up, you have the headliners with a very witty and entertaining look at tomorrow's big stories. Well done to Maria, Nicola and Mescana, plus, of course, Josh as well. What a dream team. See you on Friday at 8.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. February is continuing on its reasonably unsettled picture, and it has been a very wet end to the weekend for many southern areas of England. We've got this band of rain continuing to sweep its way eastwards, particularly for southeastern England overnight and into the early hours of tomorrow morning. Some very persistent rainfall could provide some disruption and localised flooding in places, so do continue to take care. Further north, there will be some clear spells overnight, some showers falling on frozen surfaces where we see patchy frost developing across parts of Scotland, so we might see some icy stretches first thing on Monday morning. Otherwise, there will be some sunny intervals for many of us, but this rain in the far southeast will just take a little bit of time to eventually clear its way off. Quite a brisk northeasterly breeze coming in off the North Sea, and it is going to make it feel quite cold and crisp. Some showers just filtering in on that for northeastern England and eastern Scotland as well. Temperatures will be around where we'd expect them to be for the time of year, but as I said, that cold breeze could certainly make it feel a little bit bitter. Into Tuesday, this ridge of high pressure that has brought us to fine conditions on Monday will slowly slip its way southwards, allowing this cold front to then move its way in from the northwest, so increasingly turning wet and windy for Scotland and Northern Ireland first thing. And we'll watch as that front slowly pushes its way southeastwards during the day. It will tend to fizzle out, turning lighter and patchier, so certainly the far southeast will stay dry for a good portion of the day. We continue to see, though, further bands of rain and showers moving their way in throughout the second half of the week. But enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama.
Alabama, yeah.
And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting, and that you had... Obviously, I was in no pain or anything like that. I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why, if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions.
No.
We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Let's start with some breaking news this evening. A man is in a critical condition after setting himself alight outside the Israeli embassy in Washington. That's according to local authorities. The fire was put out by the Secret Service. The man is now in hospital with life-threatening injuries. Local police and Secret Service are investigating the incident. The Embassy of Israel in Washington has this evening told us that the man is unknown and that no embassy staff were injured. Israel's embassy has been the target of continued protest against the war in Gaza. More on this story as it develops. Labour is demanding assurances that suspended Tory MP Lee Anderson won't have the whip returned. Today, the former deputy chair still refused to apologise for saying the London mayor was controlled by Islamists. Shadow Cabinet Officer Minister Jonathan Ashworth has written to Rishi Sunak to confirm he won't be allowed back into the party. Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden says it was right to remove the whip from Mr Anderson.
Well, I don't believe that Lee Anderson is an Islamophobe, but words matter, and the choice of words that he used, the choice of words that he used was not appropriate. He was given the opportunity to apologise, didn't take that opportunity, and therefore the Chief Whip took the decision to remove the whip from him.
Another debate on Gaza will be held in the Commons after the chaotic vote on Wednesday. The SNP says it will take up the Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle's offer of a meaningful debate on a new ceasefire motion. There was uproar after he allowed MPs to vote on a Labour amendment, leading to calls for his resignation. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn says his party will seek to move the debate forward that would push Parliament to support what he describes as concrete chaos. The body of a missing teenage boy has been recovered from a lake in Staffordshire. Police were called to Rudyard Lake shortly after 9:30 last night after 3 teenage boys were seen in the water. 2 of them were able to get out of the lake and were taken to hospital. Specialist search teams recovered the 17-year-old body this afternoon. Police are not treating his death as suspicious. And the Prime Minister has called on the US to continue providing bolder military support for Ukraine following the second anniversary of Russia's invasion. Writing in the Sunday Times, Rishi Sunak said Ukraine's allies should use money obtained through Russian sanctions and assets to fund Ukraine's defence. That comes as President Volodymyr Zelensky has told a conference of world leaders in Kyiv today that Russian forces will attempt another offensive in Ukraine in late May or in the summer. Well, in response, Zelensky says there's a clear plan for a new Ukrainian offensive, but that he cannot share the details. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's over to headliners.
Thank you, Tatiana. Hello and welcome to Headliners, your nightly run through the next day's news headlines with three comedians. I'm Leo Kearse, and joining me tonight to comment on the fall of Western civilization is the man with more merchandise in his van than Del Boy. It's Lewis Schaefer. And the XL bully of GB News is Nick, the big dog Dixon. Ruff, ruff. How are you both doing?
Dangerous and should be banned.
Yeah.
You're not at 10 o'clock. But I think that's an insult because he's lost a lot of weight. He looks amazing. But I've got a present for you. I've got a Team World mug.
You're plugging the merch already.
Yeah, I'm giving you a gift.
Team World, I like this.
Because of yesterday's show was such an abomination. I should have given Josh a present to keep him nice.
Well, you give him one in the break. Anyway, should we get on with the show?
I think they're looking at mine. Oh no, I've got a present.
Oh, you've got
ladies,
well.
any takers? This could help me a lot.
And you can go to lewisschaefer.co.uk.
Okay, this is a serious show. That's the mugs out of the way. Let's have a look at Monday's front pages of the newspapers. The Daily Mail leads with Generation Sick Note. We're going to cover that story in a moment. The Guardian has Sunak urged to speak out as Islamophobia row deepens. The Times has cleverly warns of AI fakes threat to election. The Telegraph leads with Red Wall revolt over Anderson sacking. The Express has damning claims of 250,000 extra migrants a year under Labour. And the Daily Star has wet, wet, wet. And those were your front pages. And let's have a closer look at those front pages, starting with Monday's Telegraph, Lewis.
Yes, good news. Red Wall revolt. Oh, that could be good news.
It is.
Oh, good news. I got my good news.
Just tell us what the story is.
Red Wall revolt over Anderson sacking, and this has to do with our own Lee Anderson, we've met him, and he's really funny, and I like the guy.
Yeah.
And he said a bad thing. He said the Islamist has gotten control of Sadiq Khan in London. And the Conservative Party didn't like that because we have to be nice to everybody.
Yeah, and a lot of people didn't like it because of Islamophobia and racism and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, Sadiq Khan, I don't believe he's under the control of Islamists, Nick. But there's certainly some things that somebody under the control of Islamists would do. I mean, his police have harassed and intimidated anti-Hamas protesters. They've allowed projections of genocidal chants to go up on Big Ben.
Yeah, Sadiq Khan's appalling, though it didn't help necessarily to make this link that our esteemed colleague Lee Anderson made. But the whole thing's been blown out of proportion. It's been a distraction, of course, from the main issue. Yeah. Oliver Dowden's been out trying to bring it back to the main issue, which was, of course, MPs feeling threatened by Islamic extremists. Sunak put out a statement today, didn't even manage to use the word Islamic or Islamicist or anything. It was just terror he managed to mention. So they're failing to get to grips with the issue. The Lee Anderson thing's been a massive distraction. And now it's even been a problem that the Red Wall MPs are saying our constituents love Lee Anderson and they're totally against suspending him. Because the only thing, my only criticism of Lee was that he issued that apology. I suppose he had to. But it does seem like...
the issue with the apology.
Yeah, it's an apology. And what I didn't like about it was it mentioned Islamophobia, this sort of nonsense word, and it conflated that with anti-Semitism, and they're not the same, as we'll get into later. So I didn't like that. But lots of people basically seem to be realising that the apology was just sort of arbitrary, and they're still sort of on his side, and they're very much against the Tories. And the point is, it just shows, once again, we need a new party because the Tories can't really contain someone like Lee Anderson. They can't contain Suella Braverman or Liz Truss because you just get the left and the wet Tories saying, oh, these people are terrible, they need to be out of the party. They can't incorporate this red wall side of the party.
Yeah, and there certainly seems to be a massive gulf between, you know, what the sort of the metropolitan elites who set the opinions in most of the newspapers think, and what people in the red wall, people across the country, genuinely think. A lot of people are worried about the growth of Islamism and how it's allowed to just it's not challenged in any way. In fact, sometimes the government's funding it through, you know, funding radical mosques like the Green Lane mosques.
Well, it's interesting. He uses the term Islamist. It could be just this team preference. I see myself. You know, you don't even realize you have a preference until the situation comes up and you suddenly, I'm a gung-ho American. I don't think about it all the time. And that's what this guy is. It's Sadiq Khan. He believes in that stuff so deeply to the core of his being. He doesn't have to be captured by anybody. Nobody's gotten control of the guy.
Yeah.
This is what he believes. The point about this story is that if you want to have true democracy, you need someone to stand up and say, we don't like what's going on.
Yeah.
And I thought Lee Anderson was that guy, but I don't think he's that guy now.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think there'd be a lot less Islamophobia if if Islamism was dealt with. And I think part of that is not just screaming racist to anybody who says, oh, wait a minute, there might be a problem with this, and it's bad that MPs are getting threatened, and it's bad that, you know, there are terror attacks and all the rest of it. So, yeah. OK, well, what's on the front cover of The Times, Nick? What are they leaking?
The Times have cleverly warns of AI fakes threat to election. This is James Cleverly, of course, and he's saying that deep fakes pose a perfect threat. He's talking about a perfect storm of basically social media combined with AI. And what he's worried about is that we'll have a Tory deep fake accidentally saying something conservative, and they'll have to say, no, it wasn't us. It wasn't us. We want high taxes and open borders, and they'll panic. And so he's very worried about that. And the other thing that worries me slightly is that when I see talk like that, although he's of course right that this is a threat, but when he talks about this, I sort of immediately think they're going to censor the internet or something. You know what I mean? As soon as they start talking like this, like, what are they going to do? Bring in something draconian that gives us less freedom? That's what my alarm bells go off. Yeah. Or it could just be quite a boring speech. Yeah,
Lewis, are you worried about deep fakes? Because every time I've seen them, they seem like the Taylor Swift ones. They look like 70s album covers. It was very obviously airbrushed and not an actual photo.
You know what? Yeah, I wasn't worried when this whole thing came out, the AI thing. I was like totally disinterested, and now I'm like, really, I think it could be something. I've seen some images of things, and my first thought is it real?
The audio is very real. You know, when they had the Starmer one when he was swearing, which of course Starmer would never do. And you like, that sounds so accurate. Yeah. The visual ones, as you say, so far maybe not quite as good. Yeah. But I've heard audios, Leo, of you saying terrible stuff. Turns out it was your WhatsApp message you sent to, but it was your voice notes. But yeah.
But the flip side of this, don't you think, is that people aren't going to believe if there's genuine exposés of politicians saying terrible things or getting drunk and, you know, taking off their trousers, people won't believe that it really happened.
They won't, and that's probably a good thing, because it means unless people see things with their own eyes, and even then you can't trust it, then I think what they have to do with AI is that they have to pass a law which forces there for each image to have 6 fingers on hand. To let people know.
Aren't people just going to wear a fake 6th finger so that everybody thinks that picture of them? You can go out and do anything. You can live the life of, go to fetish clubs and do all kinds of drugs. Just have a prosthetic 6th finger. Anyway, moving on. What's the front cover of the Daily Mail, Lewis?
Daily Mail, Generation Sick Note. It says that a lot of young kids who are I don't know what generation, 18 to 24-year-olds. I can't
Zoomers. Gen Z.
Yeah, is that Gen Z?
I think so.
I don't know.
It is.
You know you're old.
Yeah, when you look in the mirror.
Yeah. And people tell you.
When you can't bend down and tie up your shoelaces. You know you're old.
It says that a lot of young people are blaming what they call mental health for being out of work. And that's what they call it. They call it, I'm suffering from mental health. Have you heard that said? I've heard that said, I'm suffering. Like,
yeah, it's a strange way of putting it. It's like, I'm suffering from health.
Mental health. But I mean, I would say that I have more mental health problems than Nick does, but he gets ahead on it.
It's close. I mean, this is it. I mean, look, we do have a mental health crisis. Our society is anxiety-inducing. We're isolated. We're in a godless society. We have maybe too much time to think Those are things, but you can still come to work, as I have proved. You can still come to work in the midst of extreme. Oh, you've got no idea. You can still come to work and do your job, even though you're really struggling. So maybe they just need to get to work and just.
This is Nick's an inspiration. This is what two years without doing a mass shooting at work. This is
exactly
really incredible.
Exactly. I know. I just tick off every day on the calendar, since doing so well.
But the #1 cause of this mental health problem is high carbohydrates.
I knew you were going to say that. How did I know?
Isn't it?
It's totally not.
Isn't it driven by social media and the fact that, everybody thinks that everything can be medicalised now? And also a lot of things. I've seen a lot of my friends. I mean, all right, they're not Generation Z, they're a bit older than that. But they get themselves diagnosed with ADHD so that they can get the medication. And the medication is basically NHS-grade speed.
Yeah.
So, it's all... I mean, there's an incentive there for people to have mental health problems.
To get the drugs, but that's not the same thing as actually having the mental illness. And there's nothing we can do about social media. But we can do something about lay off the oatmeal.
Do you know what the real cause is of this? It's life. It's incredibly hard. People are mean to you. You die. You get illnesses. It's the existential reality that no one's ever cracked. We've had mental health issues throughout time because that's just what life is. Very
let's
hard.
See if we can finish on a slightly lighter note with the Daily Star, Nick.
We can, because this is Wet, Wet, Wet. You remember them.
Great band.
Yeah, Sweet Little Mystery, Good Night Girl, Caught Up in Your Wishing Well, so stuff like that.
I don't know.
Anyway, you're American, you didn't have it. They're Scottish. Anyway, the point is, it's the wettest, it's the torrential rain from the Star. Boffins have been out, and they figured out it's torrential rain on Leap Day, and it's going to be the wettest February since 1766. Almost when America took over, beat us in that war, but it was 1776. But presumably this will still be blamed on climate change, like everything.
Yeah, and it's also the wettest Tory party since 1760.
Nice, good point.
Good.
They might be deep fakes.
But something's interesting about Leap Day. So this is a Leap Day year, 1 out of every 4, the 29th, and that's the day that Louis Schaefer is having a live stand-up comedy show at the Old Nun's Head in Nunhead. You can come see Louis Schaefer. You can touch me and kiss me.
It's also how you stay so young, because you're 107, but you were born on a Leap Day.
I hadn't thought about that. The point is, we're doing our benefit for Residence FM.
Is that the point of this show?
That is the point.
That's a different channel.
You know what? They're not paying me as much as they pay you.
I feel like we've drifted away from the story here. But anyway, that's the front pages dealt with. We have an extremely spicy part 2 with France's 12-hour deportations and how slashing immigration would put more than £1,000 in everyone's pocket. See you in a couple of minutes. Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
You have a president in President Biden who's not enforcing the law that was passed by Congress. President Obama, criticize him or not, actually enforced the law and was deporting people that had crossed illegally. Of course, President Trump enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states in the United States. Astonishing numbers.
And Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Headliners. I'm Leo Kerser. I'm still here with Lewis, the mug merchant Schaefer, and Nick, the big dog Dixon, kicking off this section with Monday's Times. And Baroness Worsley has accused the Tories of anti-Muslim racism, which is interesting because Islam isn't a race, Nick.
Correct, Leo. So Tories see Muslims as fair game, says Baroness Varzi, and she is the former chairwoman, surprisingly, of the Conservatives. And unfortunately, this is basically lies and sophistry. So she says that she said there was a clear display that anti-Muslim racism is tolerated within the Conservatives. And again, as you pointed out there, she's conflating race and Islamophobia, this word. And I shared a Christopher Hitchens clip that's doing well on X because people... It was very, very interesting. He talked about when that word was introduced. He said, this word's being introduced and it will be used as if it's an accusation of race hater, and really it's just criticising a very extreme religion. Now, whether you agree with his characterisation of Islam, the point is there's a massive difference between saying, you know, you hate black people versus, oh, I have some qualms with the Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation. So they're very, very different things. And she's doing it again here when she says, we rightly don't allow Labour to acquiesce in anti-Semitism. Why do we think we can on Islamophobia? Because they're not the same thing. Anti-Semitism means not liking Jewish people. Islamophobia is a made-up word that is used to stop people criticising Islam who may have legitimate criticisms. So it's not the same at all. And what's really shocking about all this is I just saw Adil Ray, OBE, and Varsi is doing the same thing here. Sunak released a statement because MPs felt threatened by Islamic extremists. And in that statement, he didn't manage to mention Islam at all, as I've said. He just said extremism and terror threats. Could have been the IRA. But that's not good enough for them. They then said, why has he not mentioned Islamophobia in that statement? It's like, it's a statement about MPs feeling under threat. And you're more worried about Islamophobia. So it's kind of absurd. It's a kind of Trumpian negotiating tactic. They're coming with such an absurd offer, which is you've got to always make the Islamophobia the main point.
Which always seems to happen. I mean, even the Speaker of the House, Lindsay Hoyle, after an MP had to step down because of threats to him and his family, he was talking about Mike Freer. Lindsay Hoyle was talking about the far right and white supremacists, as if that's a huge issue with terror attacks and white supremacist grooming gangs and all the rest of it, Lewis.
But what Islamophobia is the fear of Islam. And technically, that's what the word phobia means.
Like arachnophobia.
It's arachnophobia.
But if an Islamic extremist came scuttling out from underneath the couch, I think I would jump.
That's not... This is very interesting to me, this story, because what I've noticed is how there's kind of an equity involved now between the Jewish situation and now the Palestinians, where this woman is saying, hey, I feel that there's prejudice against me, people saying things against me because I'm a Muslim. And it's like the exact same thing that the Jews always say. It's like they've taken the playbook from the Jews.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it's the same thing like in Israel, they're saying the Jews are exterminating the Palestinians.
Right.
That there's a Holocaust. It's saying, look at us. We